It is great to be here. KED forum is always an interesting forum to exchange views on topics which we discuss in the European institutions. And indeed, now after a heavy time of regulation in the aftermath of the finance and economic crisis after 2008, I think that is the right point that we focus on the cumulative effects of regulation, and that is started in the European Parliament. You have perhaps seen that there is an increasing uneasiness of the parliamentarians, of the colleagues in the Econ committee, cross-party, on the situation that we have the feeling that in some cases there is not a one-to-one implementation of what we have passed in our laws. So we have this discussion, for instance, with the level 2 measures in PRIPS. That is causing quite a bit of problems for the industry, we know that, because they shall implement on the 1st of January things which are not now approved by the EU legislators, and that might not be possible, but that should be a warning to the European Commission and also to the authorities, the supervisory authorities, that it is absolutely necessary that with the level 2 measures that the institutions are not going beyond what the legislators passed in the level 1 field. So that is the first thing I would like to stress there. The second is that we realize that after that part of legislation period with the whole packages we passed through, there are colleagues like me who now believe that we should have a period of monitoring, of impact assessment, of evaluation, because we can realize that in the financial regulation there is a spirally of intervention. And before there is a scientific evidence or whether the measures have proven to be sufficient or not, there are new measures introduced. And I brought it to the picture that if you drive a screw, you have to be careful that you don't give that screw an overdrive. And I think we have reached in some parts of the regulation the problem that we are running into the danger that the screw is overdriven. That is not shared, this view, by all colleagues, but there is an increasing sensitivity or awareness on this topic. And therefore I can just focus on the resolution we have passed in the Econ Committee last week according to the Basel discussion, Basel III, the completion of Basel III, or like some participants of the financial community call it Basel IV. There are a lot of hints that indeed, in fact, in the outcome, the models which are on the table in the Basel Committee of Banking Supervisory would lead to an increase of risk-weight assets required up to 30% in the standard approach, and even higher in the internal rating-based approach. Yes, we know about the methodological discussions on the internal rating-based approach. Perhaps we have to look into that question a little bit more in detail, but we realize that this increase of capital requirement could bring the European banks and financial institutions in a backward position, in a competitive disadvantage, and there are huge doubts in the industry whether that would be justified and whether really the differences in the markets, if we compare the European Union to the United States, are really reflected, for instance, in the models which are discussed in Basel. And from that point of view, the European Parliament gave a strong signal in the resolution in the Econ Committee to the Commission and to the Member States to take a joint view as Europeans and not to come to a quick solution and a wrong solution, which is really taking the European industry in a competitive disadvantage. I think if you look at the outcome of the election in the United States in a transitional period of the U.S. Government, it would be the falsest approach now to come to a quick decision in Basel till the end of year, as we do not know what the position of the Trump administration will be. Because if we look on what the president-elect has said in the campaign, there are some changes announced, and it would be wrong now to implement something in Europe which will be not implemented in the United States. So I'm completely in favor of a level playing field. But if we compare, for instances, in the securitization issue, we realize that the regulation density in the US is not as far-reaching in some parts as it is in the plans of the European Union. And we also realize that in the internal rating-based approach, for instance, the use of proxy data is much easier in the United States than in the European Union. Just to give you two examples where there are differences, and from that point of view, I personally am in favor of having a closer look into the comparison between these biggest economic areas, US and European Union. And the last point which I would like to focus is, in the legislation, the European Parliament always pushed forward for a risk adequacy in the regulation, because we think that the same things should be the same things should be treated equal, and different things should be treated differently. We have the feeling that in some of the legislative proposals, this risk proportionality or risk adequacy is not reached yet. And from that point of view, I suggested, and colleagues like Burkhard Balz and others suggested, to introduce a small banking box. Perhaps it's not a question of small or big, but more a question of higher risk and lower risk. And from that point of view, perhaps we should discuss about a simplification approach, whether we could call it a smart banking box or a small or a simple banking box, I don't know. But the principle of proportionality and risk adequacy, I think, would lead us in a better way if we are now going into the revision, for instance, of the CRD4. If we look on what is on the table, which is in the service consultation at the moment on the level of the European Commission, we are afraid that there is not enough proposals leading to that direction in what is discussed or passed by the Commission. So we are keen, we are waiting for that proposals, and if these proposals are on the table, then we will certainly comment in that direction. You see, there is a lot of discussion in the European Parliament. There is an increasing sensitivity, but I would like to conclude with the remark that the European Parliament does not want now to start a period of general deregulation and liberalization. So yes, we wanted to have a better standard, and we wanted to draw the right conclusions out of the economic and financial crisis. And after the Brexit, I think we have seen that the resilience has already increased. So if we look at it, we should not forget that the strategy which we have taken is successful, but it makes sense at this point also to have the monitoring, the impact assessment, the evaluation, and then to decide whether it is really necessary to increase the bureaucratic and regulatory burden, which is now piling up for some billions. I've read a figure only for Germany. It is piling up for 9 billion euros annually additional cost for the industry. And if we have that figure for the whole European Union, you see that regulation has its price, it's necessary, but we have to be careful to have the right balance so that the European financial industry will be competitive as well in the world scale. Thank you very much.